The music room was quiet that afternoon. Dust floated in the sunlight that came through tall windows, and the grand piano sat at the center of the room like a sleeping giant. Most students had already gone home after their classes, but a few still lingered in the hallways, laughing, chatting, and scrolling through their phones. Inside the room, the janitor was sweeping the floor. His steps were slow but steady, and there was something peaceful about the way he worked. He never said much, but everyone knew him. He was the quiet man who came early in the morning and left late at night. His shirt was always neatly pressed even though it was faded from years of washing. His gray hair showed his age, but his eyes were kind. He never complained, no matter how much work he had to do. That day, as he bent down to pick up a candy wrapper from under the piano, a loud burst of laughter echoed through the hallway. A group of students entered the room, talking and laughing about their upcoming music recital. They were some of the most confident students in the academy, the kind who always made sure everyone noticed them. Among them was a girl with long, shiny hair and a voice that always sounded like she was used to being listened to. Her father was one of the major sponsors of the music academy, and everyone treated her with special care. She loved attention and rarely passed up a chance to show off. When she saw the janitor near the piano, she rolled her eyes and said loudly, "Oh, look, even he wants to play music now." Her friends laughed. She walked closer and tapped the piano lid with her perfectly manicured hand. "Play something," she said in a teasing tone. "Play, and maybe I'll tell my father to give you a raise." The janitor looked up, confused for a moment, not sure if she was serious or just joking. Her friends giggled behind her, whispering to each other. One of them added, "Yeah, let's see what the great cleaner can do." He smiled faintly, trying not to take their words to heart. "I'm just cleaning, miss," he said softly, continuing his work. But she wasn't done. "Come on," she said again, leaning against the piano. "It's just a few keys. You can't ruin something that already sounds perfect." Her tone had a hint of mockery, and her friends burst into laughter once more. The janitor said nothing. He simply dusted the piano lid with his cloth and stepped aside, his movements calm and patient. He was used to such remarks, and he had heard many before. Most students never looked at him twice except when they wanted to make a joke or ask for something to be cleaned. But that day, one of the teachers walked past the open door and noticed the scene. She was a young woman who taught voice lessons and had always respected the janitor's quiet nature. Hearing the laughter, she paused and said gently, "Is everything all right here?" The students fell silent for a second, pretending to look innocent. The girl quickly smiled and said, "Oh yes, we were just joking around." The teacher's eyes moved toward the janitor. "I see," she said softly. Then to the girl she added, "You should be careful. Jokes don't always sound the same to the person hearing them." The girl's smile faded slightly, but she shrugged it off. "It's fine," she said, brushing her hair back. "He didn't mind, right?" The janitor gave a polite nod. "It's okay, miss. I'm used to it." The teacher sighed but said nothing more. She left the room, shaking her head slightly as she walked down the hall. The janitor continued sweeping as if nothing had happened. But as he worked, he looked at the piano for a brief moment, a soft, almost hidden expression in his eyes. It wasn't anger or sadness. It was something deeper, something that held memories. When the students left, still giggling, he stood quietly in front of the piano. His fingers hovered just above the keys, not touching them. For a moment, he closed his eyes. If someone had been there, they might have noticed how his hands trembled slightly, as if remembering movements long forgotten. But then he took a deep breath, stepped back, and returned to his broom. Later that evening, as the hallways grew quiet, he finished his work and walked to the small staff room where he kept his things. There was a faded photograph taped to his locker door, a picture of a woman smiling, holding a little girl in her arms. He touched the photo gently before putting on his jacket. Outside, the air was cool and the streetlights flickered faintly. He walked home with slow steps, passing by the park where children still played. He smiled softly when he saw a boy chasing a ball and a woman laughing nearby. It reminded him of days long past, days when his own daughter used to wait for him outside their small apartment, waving excitedly whenever he came home from his evening job. At that time, he wasn't a janitor. He had once been a musician, not famous but good enough to play in small concerts and earn applause from strangers. Music had been his life, his passion, and his comfort. He had taught his daughter her first lullabies on the piano. But life had a way of changing things. His wife had fallen ill and the medical bills had taken away everything they had saved. Music couldn't pay for the hospital. The stage lights had faded, replaced by the soft hum of cleaning machines and the sound of his broom sweeping floors. But he never complained. He did what he had to do, because his family meant everything to him. That night he sat in his small living room with a cup of tea. The walls were bare except for one thing, a keyboard covered with a cloth. It was old, the kind that had lost some of its keys. He slowly uncovered it and sat down. His fingers touched the keys and a soft tune filled the air. It wasn't loud, but it carried warmth, something real and honest as he played. The memories returned. His wife smiling as he practiced, his daughter laughing beside him, clapping her little hands when he played her favorite melody. He played until the clock ticked past midnight, and then he stopped, wiping away a tear that had fallen without him realizing. The next morning, he returned to the academy before sunrise. The hall was empty and quiet again, the way he liked it. He swept the floors, arranged the chairs, and made sure the piano shone before the students arrived. He always made sure the piano was spotless, maybe because somewhere deep inside he still respected what it stood for. When the girl came in later that morning, she didn't even look at him. She and her friends were too busy talking about their upcoming performance. But as she sat at the piano, something in her head replayed the moment from the previous day. The teacher's look, the janitor's calm eyes, and the soft silence that had followed her joke. She brushed it off quickly and started playing, hitting the keys too hard at first. The janitor listened from across the room as she practiced. She had talent, that was clear, but her music lacked something and the feeling that came from the heart. He didn't judge her for it. He just understood. As the days passed, he continued his quiet work while the students practiced for the big charity concert. None of them knew that the janitor who polished their floors could once play the same piano with more grace than most of them. None of them knew how life had turned him from a performer into a cleaner. But life, as it often does, had its own plans. Fate was quietly setting the stage for something unexpected. The same piano that had been polished by his hands for years would soon remind everyone, including that proud, laughing girl, that talent and dignity can live in the most ordinary people. And when that moment came, no one would laugh again. The week went by quietly after that afternoon. The janitor kept working as he always did, sweeping the floors, polishing the piano, and making sure every corner of the music academy looked clean before the students arrived. He never spoke much, and when he did, it was only in short, polite sentences. Most students didn't pay attention to him. They were too busy with their rehearsals and their performances. The annual charity concert was just around the corner, and everyone wanted to shine. The Academy Hall echoed daily with the sound of violins, flutes, drums, and pianos. Each student hoped to impress their teachers and maybe catch the attention of someone important who might be in the audience that night. The same girl who had mocked the janitor was one of the performers. She was proud of her talent, and to be fair, she really could play. Her father had hired private tutors for her since she was little, and she loved to be in the spotlight. She had chosen a difficult classical piece for the concert, one that even some experienced pianists found challenging. She practiced it for hours, but there was something missing. Every time she played, it sounded right, but not alive. Her teacher noticed it one afternoon and said gently, "You have the technique, but you're missing the feeling. Music is not only about notes, it's about the story behind them." The girl frowned. "I don't get it," she said. "I'm playing every note correctly." The teacher smiled softly. "Yes, but music doesn't live in correctness. It lives in emotion. When you play, you must tell a story and not show perfection." The girl didn't reply. She didn't understand what that meant, and in truth, she didn't really care at that moment. She wanted to impress people, not make them feel something. That same day, the teacher went to the staff room where the janitor was quietly fixing a broken chair. She sat down and said with a sigh, "The students are talented, but they don't understand what real music is anymore. They just want applause." The janitor looked up and smiled slightly. "It's hard to teach feeling," he said. "Sometimes people have to live through life before they understand what emotion really means." The teacher looked at him curiously. "You speak like someone who's known music deeply," she said. He hesitated, then nodded. "Once, yes, long ago." She tilted her head, surprised. "You played?" "For many years," he replied. until life gave me other things to take care of." There was a gentle sadness in his voice, and for a moment the teacher didn't know what to say. She had always sensed there was more to him than what met the eye. "You must have been very good," she said softly. He didn't answer. He only smiled faintly and went back to fixing the chair. That night, when everyone had left, the janitor stayed behind as usual to finish his cleaning. The moonlight spilled into the hall, and the piano gleamed in the corner. He looked around. There was no one. Slowly, almost shyly, he walked to the piano and sat down. His hands hovered over the keys, and then, with a deep breath, he began to play. The melody that came out was soft, slow, and full of feeling. It was a tune that spoke of love, loss, and quiet endurance. He didn't play like a man showing off. He played like someone remembering. The sound filled the empty hall, echoing off the walls and into the night. What he didn't know was that someone was standing at the doorway. The young teacher had forgotten her notebook in the classroom and had come back to get it. When she heard the music, she stopped, frozen in place. The sound drew her closer, and when she saw who was playing, her eyes widened. The janitor, the quiet, humble man who cleaned the floors every day, was playing like a professional, like someone who had once lived and breathed music. His fingers moved with grace and memory, and every note carried emotion. She didn't make a sound. She just stood there listening until he finished. When the last note faded, he sat quietly for a moment, his eyes closed. The teacher finally stepped forward and said softly, "That was beautiful." He turned around, startled, but then smiled politely. "Oh, I'm sorry, miss. I didn't know anyone was still here." "You don't have to apologize," she said, walking closer. "That was one of the most heartfelt pieces I've ever heard. Why didn't you ever tell anyone you could play like that?" He hesitated before answering. "It doesn't matter anymore. Life changes. Some dreams are meant to stay in the past. But you shouldn't hide that kind of gift," she said. "People need to hear this." He smiled sadly. "People already have enough music to listen to. They don't need mine." The teacher didn't agree, but she could see that he didn't want to talk about it anymore. So she simply said, "If you ever change your mind, I'd be honored to hear you play again." He nodded, and she left quietly. The next morning, the teacher couldn't stop thinking about what she had seen. During class, she mentioned to one of her colleagues about the janitor's hidden talent, and soon the story quietly spread among the staff. Some were surprised, others curious. They wondered if it was true. Could their janitor really play like that? Meanwhile, the girl who had mocked him continued to practice restlessly. She was getting frustrated because no matter how hard she tried, her performance lacked spark. Every time she thought she had improved, her teacher found something missing. One afternoon, while she was practicing in the hall, her teacher entered and sat quietly to listen. After a few minutes, she said, "You play well, but tell me, what do you feel when you play this piece?" The girl looked confused. "Feel? I don't know. I just focus on hitting the right notes." "That's the problem," the teacher said softly. "Music isn't math, it's emotion. If you can't feel it, the audience won't either." The girl frowned, looking frustrated. "Then what am I supposed to feel?" The teacher looked thoughtful, then said, "Maybe you should talk to someone who understands music beyond the stage, someone who's lived it." "Who?" the girl asked, puzzled. The teacher smiled faintly. "You'll see." Later that evening, as the students were leaving, the teacher walked up to the janitor and said, "Would you help me with something tomorrow? I want one of my students to hear what real music feels like." He looked surprised. "You mean, you want me to play?" She nodded. "If you're comfortable." He thought for a long moment. "I don't know. It's been years since I've played for anyone." She smiled kindly. "Then maybe it's time again." The next day, the teacher called the girl to the hall before class. The janitor was already there, cleaning the piano keys. The girl looked confused. "What's going on?" "I want you to listen," the teacher said. "Just listen." The janitor looked uncertain but sat down at the piano. His hands hesitated. For a second, then began to play the same soft melody he had played the night before. The girl stood there silent. The music slowly filled the air, gentle, deep, and real. Every note carried a story she couldn't quite understand but could feel. It wasn't loud or fancy. It was pure, full of truth. By the time he finished, her eyes were wide, and for once, she had nothing to say. The teacher smiled quietly and said, "That is what music sounds like when it comes from the heart." The girl didn't speak. She just stared at the janitor, realizing this was the same man she had laughed at days ago. The same man she thought knew nothing about music. He stood up humbly and said, "I hope that helps you, miss." She opened her mouth to respond but couldn't find any words. Something inside her had shifted. For the first time, she understood what her teacher meant by feeling the music. That night, she sat at her own piano at home and tried to play again, but this time she didn't think about perfection. She thought about that old man's hands, about the quiet sadness in his melody, and how it made her feel. For the first time, her music sounded different, softer, more real. She didn't tell anyone, but from that day on, she never looked at the janitor the same way again, and though she didn't know it yet, the story between them, the one that would soon surprise the entire academy, had only just begun. The days passed quickly as the charity concert drew near. The air inside the music academy was filled with energy and nervous excitement. Students practiced from morning until evening. Some rehearsed with teachers, others alone in quiet corners. Everyone wanted to make an impression that night. The girl had been practicing harder than anyone. Something had changed in her ever since that morning she heard the janitor play. She didn't tell anyone what she had felt that day, but her teacher noticed it in the way she played now. Her notes had more softness, more emotion. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was no longer mechanical. It was alive. Still, her pride hadn't disappeared completely. Part of her was still unwilling to admit how deeply that moment had affected her. Every time she saw the janitor quietly mopping the hallway, she felt a strange mix of guilt and respect. She wanted to say something to him, maybe thank him, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. She didn't know how. One morning, while everyone prepared for rehearsal, the academy faced a small problem. The piano tuner, who was supposed to come before the concert, called to say he couldn't make it because of an emergency. The head teacher was worried. The piano had been used non-stop all week, and it needed proper tuning before the big day. As the teachers discussed what to do, one of them said, "What about the janitor? He seems to know something about instruments." The head teacher frowned slightly. "He's not a professional tuner." "I know," the teacher said softly, "but he has experience. He used to be a pianist himself." The head teacher looked surprised. "Really?" The younger teacher nodded. "He's better than most of us, believe me." After a short pause, the head teacher agreed. "All right, call him." The janitor was wiping windows when one of the teachers approached him. "Would you help us check the piano? It needs tuning and the tuner can't come." He hesitated. "I can try, but it's been years since I worked with the inside of a piano." "It's fine," she said kindly. "You're the only one we trust with it." He gave a small smile and nodded. When he entered the hall, some students were already there. The girl was among them. She froze when she saw him walking toward the piano. A few students exchanged confused glances. The janitor? Touching the academy's grand piano? They whispered among themselves. He ignored the whispers and carefully lifted the lid of the piano. His movements were slow and respectful, like someone greeting an old friend after a long time apart. He touched a few keys, listening closely. The sound was slightly off, but still good. Then he began to adjust the tuning pegs with gentle precision. The students stood around watching. Some seemed skeptical while others were curious. The girl tried to act uninterested, but her heart was beating faster for reasons she didn't fully understand. After a few minutes, one of the boys laughed, quietly, and said, "Is this for real? We're letting the janitor fix the piano?" Another student smirked. "Maybe he'll give us a concert after this." The girl shot them a look that made them go silent. She didn't know why she felt protective of him, but she did. When he finished tuning, the teacher asked him, "Would you mind playing something, just to check the sound?" He hesitated for a moment. "I can, if it's all right," the teacher nodded. "Please do." He sat down on the piano bench. The students stood in silence. The same boy who had made a joke earlier crossed his arms, waiting to laugh again. The girl stood with her arms folded, pretending to be calm but feeling a strange nervousness in her chest. The janitor placed his fingers on the keys. At first, he just played a few soft notes, testing the sound. Then, slowly, the melody began. It wasn't a famous song or a practiced piece. It was something his heart knew. The sound that came out was unlike anything the students had heard before. It was smooth but filled with deep emotion, sadness mixed with beauty, love mixed with longing. His hands moved gracefully, like they had never forgotten what they were born to do. Every note seemed to speak, and even those who didn't understand music could feel what it was saying. The laughter, the whispers, and all stopped. The room fell into complete silence except for the piano. The girl stood frozen, her eyes wide. She could feel her throat tighten, but she didn't know why. The same music that had touched her once before was now stronger, clearer, and alive in front of everyone. The janitor's eyes stayed closed as he played, lost in the melody. For him, there were no students, no teachers, only the piano and the memories it carried. He thought of his wife, of his daughter, of the nights he had played to keep hope alive. He thought of the silence that followed when he had to stop. And now, after so many years, he was letting it speak again. When the last note faded, no one moved. It was as if time had stopped. Then one by one, people began to clap. Slowly at first, then louder and louder. Some stood up. Others looked emotional without understanding why. The head teacher, who had been standing at the doorway, was speechless. "That was extraordinary," he whispered. The janitor smiled shyly. "Thank you, sir. I just wanted to make sure the piano was working fine." The students laughed softly, but it wasn't mocking laughter this time. It was nervous, surprised, even admiring. The girl stepped forward. "Wait," she said softly. "What was that piece you played?" He looked up at her. "It wasn't written down anywhere. It's something I made up long ago." "It was beautiful," she said quietly. He gave a small nod, his voice gentle. "Music speaks best when it comes from the heart." The teacher smiled proudly. "Would you consider playing at the charity concert?" He looked surprised. "Me? Oh no, I'm just the janitor." "Not just," she said firmly. "You're more than that. You reminded everyone here what music really means." He shook his head. "It's your students' moment, not mine." But the head teacher, still moved by what he'd heard, said, "Please think about it. It would be an honor." He didn't answer right away. He simply smiled and went back to cleaning the piano, pretending he hadn't heard. As the students left, they couldn't stop talking about what had just happened. Some were embarrassed for having judged him. Others were simply amazed. That evening, the girl went home and couldn't stop thinking about the melody. It played again and again in her head. She tried to play something similar on her piano, but she couldn't capture that feeling. There was something pure about his playing that she couldn't reproduce no matter how many times she tried. Her father came into the room while she was practicing. "You've been at it for hours," he said with a laugh. "Don't wear yourself out before the concert." She smiled faintly. "I'm fine, I just want to play it right." Her father nodded and said, "You always do." Then he left, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She sat still for a long time, thinking about what she had seen. That humble man, sitting in his worn clothes, had played with more emotion than anyone she'd ever known. He didn't need fancy clothes or attention. He just had something real, something she wanted to find in herself. The next morning, she arrived early at the academy. The janitor was already there, mopping the floor near the stage. She walked up quietly and said, "Good morning." He looked up, surprised. "Good morning, miss," she hesitated. "About yesterday." "Thank you," he smiled gently. "You don't have to thank me. I was just doing my work." "But it wasn't just that," she said softly. "You reminded me what music really is." He looked at her kindly. "Music is life, miss. You just have to listen to it not only with your ears but with your heart." She nodded slowly, as if those words would stay with her forever. And as she walked away, she realized that something inside her had shifted completely. The charity concert was only a few days away now, and no one knew it yet. But that event would change everything. For her, for the academy, and for the quiet janitor whose music had been sleeping for too long. The day of the charity concert finally arrived. The music academy was brighter than ever, decorated with lights and flowers. Students rushed through the hallways with instruments in hand, fixing their outfits and nervously rehearsing last-minute lines. Teachers were giving gentle reminders, the sound technicians were checking microphones, and the faint smell of polish still hung in the air. The janitor had been there since early morning, making sure everything looked perfect. He didn't complain even once, though he had been moving non-stop since dawn. He cleaned every corner of the stage, wiped the piano one last time, and adjusted the chairs so that everything looked in order. As the evening approached, guests began to arrive, parents, relatives, local sponsors, and even a few people from the town's community. Everyone was excited to see what the students had prepared. The hall filled with soft chatter and the low hum of conversation. Backstage, the students were tense. Some were stretching their fingers, some whispering their prayers. The girl sat quietly on a small stool, her music sheet resting on her lap. She looked calm on the outside, but inside her heart was racing. She had practiced for weeks, yet she knew something was different tonight. Her teacher came over and smiled. "Are you ready?" The girl nodded, though she wasn't sure if she truly was. "I think so." The teacher gave her a gentle pat on the shoulder. "Remember what I told you. Don't just play the notes and tell the story." The girl took a deep breath. "I'll try." Meanwhile, in the audience, the janitor stood quietly near the side of the hall wearing his clean uniform. He didn't plan to sit among the guests. He preferred to stay in the background where no one noticed him. That was where he was comfortable. The lights dimmed slightly and the concert began. The first few performances went smoothly. A group of violinists opened the evening, followed by a young singer who performed a heartfelt song. The audience clapped warmly after each performance. Then it was the girl's turn. She stepped onto the stage with confidence, but also with a quiet determination. The soft light from above fell on her face, and she could see her father smiling proudly in the front row. She bowed slightly to the audience and then sat at the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys. For a moment, she remembered the janitor's words. "Listen with your heart." Then she began to play. The first notes were soft and graceful. Slowly, the hall filled with the sound of music that felt different this time, fuller, richer. It wasn't just technique anymore. It was emotion. She played as if the piano was speaking for her. The melody rose and fell like waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes powerful. The audience could feel it too. There was silence, and the kind of silence that only happens when people are completely lost in a moment. When the final note faded, the hall stayed still for a few seconds. Then came the applause, long and loud. Her father stood up, clapping proudly. The girl smiled, feeling something warm inside her chest. It wasn't pride or relief, it was peace. She walked backstage, her teacher waiting for her with tears in her eyes. "That was beautiful," the teacher whispered. "You finally played from your heart?" The girl smiled shyly. "I think I finally understood what you meant." The teacher nodded. "I'm proud of you." As the concert continued, the atmosphere grew lighter. One by one, the students performed their pieces, and everything seemed perfect. But near the end, something unexpected happened. The head teacher walked onto the stage and took the microphone. "Before we close tonight," he said, smiling, "I want to share a little surprise with all of you. Someone very special has agreed to play a short piece for us." The audience looked curious. The students whispered to each other, wondering who it could be. The teacher continued. "This man has been part of our academy for years, working quietly, helping us every single day. But few of you know the talent he carries inside. Please welcome our janitor." There was a ripple of shock across the room. The girl's eyes widened. She didn't expect this at all. From the side of the hall, the janitor stood frozen for a moment, not sure if he had heard right. He shook his head slightly, but the head teacher smiled and gestured him forward. The crowd began to clap softly, encouraging him. He looked embarrassed, but finally walked toward the stage. His steps were slow and unsure. The light felt too bright for someone used to shadows. When he reached the piano, he glanced at the audience. Rows of faces watching him, some surprised, some smiling kindly. He sat down quietly. His hands rested on his knees for a second as he took a deep breath. Then he placed them gently on the piano keys. The hall fell completely silent. The first note came out soft as a whisper. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the melody took shape. Warm, sad, and breathtakingly beautiful. It was a story told without words. Each note carried something real. The weight of his struggles, the tenderness of love, the ache of loss, the quiet dignity of a man who never stopped believing in kindness. The audience leaned forward. You could hear the sound of deep breaths, even a few quiet sniffles. Some people closed their eyes. The girl watched from backstage, her hands over her mouth. She had heard him play before, but never like this. There was something in his music tonight, a quiet fire that burned with truth. The melody grew stronger, reaching its peak, then slowly began to fade, like a sunset disappearing behind a hill. When the final note lingered in the air, no one moved. It was as if time itself had paused. Then came the applause, not polite, not formal, but emotional and loud. People stood up. They clapped with their whole hearts. Some had tears in their eyes. The janitor stood up, slightly embarrassed, bowing his head humbly. The teacher came onto the stage and shook his hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "You reminded everyone here tonight why music exists." He smiled shyly. "Thank you, ma'am. I just played what I felt." When he stepped down, the girl was waiting backstage. She looked at him with watery eyes and whispered, "That was incredible." He smiled kindly. "You played beautifully too, miss." She shook her head. "Not like you. When you play, it feels like the piano is alive." He chuckled softly. "That's because I've lived with it. Music has been my only friend through many storms." She looked at him curiously. "Will you teach me?" He paused. "Teach you?" "Yes," she said. "Not how to play notes, I already know that. I want you to teach me how to play like that. Like it means something." He smiled warmly, his eyes soft. "You already have what you need. You just have to keep listening. Not to me, not even to the piano, but to life." The girl nodded slowly. Those words settled deep inside her heart. After the concert ended, the audience slowly left the hall, but the memory of his music stayed. People talked about it the entire night. Some couldn't believe that the quiet janitor they had passed by every day carried such beauty inside him. The head teacher found him outside later, standing quietly near the entrance. "You know," the teacher said, "people will remember tonight for a long time." The janitor smiled faintly. "I'm glad if it brought some joy." "It brought more than that," the teacher replied. "It brought truth." He nodded, then looked up at the stars. "Music is the only language that never lies." The girl watched him from a distance as he packed his cleaning tools after the concert. She wanted to go over and talk more, but something stopped her. Instead, she just stood there and smiled. That night, when she got home, she sat at her piano again. She placed her hands on the keys but didn't play right away. She closed her eyes, remembering his words. Then she started to play, softly, gently. And for the first time, her music carried her own story. She didn't play for fame or applause anymore. She played for the feeling of being real. And while no one else could see it, somewhere across town in a small apartment, the janitor sat at his own old keyboard, smiling to himself as he played the same tune that had changed both of their lives forever. The days after the charity concert were filled with a quiet kind of excitement. The students kept talking about what had happened, especially about the janitor who had stolen the hearts of everyone in the audience. His music had not only impressed them, it had reminded them of what music could do, how it could move people, make them feel, and bring stories to life without words. The girl who had mocked him weeks ago walked through the academy with a new understanding. She still had her pride, but it felt softer now. She no longer looked at the janitor with judgment or amusement. Instead, she felt a mix of respect and curiosity. She had realized that talent, true talent, could hide in the most unexpected places. One morning, she approached the janitor as he was mopping near the stage. He looked up, smiling politely, ready to greet her as usual. But she hesitated for a moment, then spoke softly. I wanted to say thank you," she said. He raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Thank me?" "Yes," she said. "For the music. For showing me what real music feels like. I didn't understand before and I was rude to you." "I'm sorry." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "It's all right," he said gently. You didn't know. Her voice trembled a little. I want to learn. Not just how to play the notes, but how to feel it. Will you teach me? He smiled softly. Teaching isn't always about showing someone the steps. Sometimes it's about helping them listen. She nodded slowly. I want to listen. Over the next few weeks, she began spending time with him, mostly after classes. He would sit beside her at the piano, listening quietly as she tried to play what she felt, correcting her gently when needed, but mostly letting her explore the music in her own way. She started to understand that emotion couldn't be forced. It couldn't be practiced in the usual sense. It had to come from life itself, the experiences she lived, the moments she noticed, the feelings she allowed herself to feel. For her, it was a slow process. She had been taught to think of music as something perfect, something to impress people with. But with him, it was something to live with, to explore, to let it grow inside her. Meanwhile, the janitor continued his work around the academy, quietly, without seeking recognition. But something had changed for him too. He no longer felt invisible. The students began to see him differently, not just as the man who cleaned floors, but as someone with a story, someone with real talent and heart. Some of the younger students started asking him questions about music, and he answered them patiently, remembering the joy of teaching his own daughter when she was small. The girl's father, who had been proud of her concert performance, also began to notice the janitor in a new light. One afternoon, he stopped by the academy unexpectedly and saw the janitor adjusting the piano with gentle care. He watched quietly for a few minutes and then smiled. He realized that the man had a quiet strength, a kind of dignity that couldn't be taught or bought. The academy began to change subtly as well. Students who had been competitive and focused on showing off began to slow down. They started listening more, not just to their own music, but to the music of others. Teachers noticed it too. The hallways were quieter in a good way, not empty but thoughtful. Music had reminded everyone why they were there in the first place. Then one afternoon, the head teacher approached the janitor with a small envelope in hand. I spoke with some of the local music patrons, he said. They want to offer you a chance to perform at the town hall. Not as a janitor, but as a pianist. The janitor's hands froze. He blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. Perform? He asked quietly. Yes, the teacher said with a warm smile. Your music deserves to be heard. People need to know who you are, not just what you do. He shook his head slowly. I don't know if I can. You already did once, the teacher said. And you touched everyone. Just think of it as sharing what you love, nothing more. For days he thought about it. At first he kept telling himself that he was too old, that it wasn't his place anymore. But then he remembered the girl, the students, the music academy, and the charity concert. He remembered how people had felt when he played. And finally he realized that music wasn't meant to be hidden. It was meant to be shared. The day of his performance arrived. The town hall was packed. People of all ages had come to hear the pianist who had been quietly teaching lessons at the music academy without anyone knowing his story. The janitor stepped onto the stage wearing simple clothes, his hands resting gently on the piano keys. He took a deep breath and began to play. The hall fell silent instantly. Every note carried emotion, his life, his struggles, his joys, his sorrows. People listened not just with their ears but with their hearts. Some had tears in their eyes. Some felt memories they hadn't thought about in years. His music was not loud or flashy, but it was alive. The girl sat in the front row, her own hands folded nervously in her lap. She had followed him to watch, to learn, and to support him. She realized that this was what he had meant by listening with your heart. You didn't just hear music, you felt it. You understood it. When the final note lingered in the hall, the silence held for a few seconds longer than necessary. Then the audience erupted in applause. People stood, clapped, some cheered. The janitor bowed humbly, a soft smile on his face. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen, truly seen. Afterward, many people approached him, praising him, asking questions, expressing admiration. But he remained calm, patient, and kind. He accepted the compliments without arrogance and thanked everyone with warmth. The girl walked up to him later, her eyes shining. That was amazing. You didn't just play music. You made everyone feel it. He shook his head gently. I just shared what was inside me. Everyone has music inside them if they choose to listen. She smiled and said softly, "Thank you for teaching me that." From that day on, things were different at the academy. The students learned to respect not only talent but also the heart behind it. The teachers encouraged more listening, more understanding, and the janitor, the quiet man who had worked unnoticed for years, became a symbol of patience, dedication, and true artistry. But he never let it change him. He continued to clean the hallways, polish the pianos, and take care of the students quietly. He played when asked, performed when invited, but his true joy came from seeing others grow, from hearing music in unexpected places, and from knowing that life, though often unfair, could still hold beauty. The girl continued to practice, slowly mastering the art of feeling the music instead of just playing it. She grew not only as a pianist but as a person. She learned humility, patience, and the value of respect, lessons she would carry for the rest of her life.